Okay, in this video we're going to have a look at the Minolta 7000i and talk about the I series of cameras. Now, as we've seen in the 9000 video that I did, Minolta released the 1000 series in 1985, which is the first series of kind of properly working, fully integrated autofocus cameras. And they're great cameras, and we've had a look at the 9000. In 1988 they released the improved I series, I for intelligent, and this was a series of cameras that really got it right. It was the first kind of, I suppose, answered a lot of the issues with the 1000 series and really put autofocus cameras on the map. By that time, of course, there was some competition from Canon in particular. Nikon was still messing about a bit, Pentax were not particularly good, most of the other manufacturers weren't, but Canon of course started to be a real competitor with their EOS autofocus series, which also got it right, and this was Minolta's answer, which was, I think, pretty good. This was my camera. I bought this second-hand in about 1996. I think I paid £160 for it. I reckon about 50% of all the photographs I've ever taken were taken with this camera. I bought it with a Sigma 35 to 70 lens. This is 28 to 105, which is okay. And I'd still be really happy to use this camera today. It works really well. So let's have a look at it, starting on the top plate. Okay, we've got a nice big chunky grip here on the right hand side, which is as good a grip as I've ever found in a camera. Works really nicely. A little notch for your thumb there, but yeah, that works really well. We've got a shutter button in the usual place, and just underneath it a slider, a left and right slider, which is not as good as the wheels that Canon introduced, which of course Minolta and everybody else then stole, and rightly so, because it works much better than this slider, but that's okay. From left to right, we've got a function button, a mode button, a lock, on and bip for sound, so that's on with autofocus sound. There we go. We've got the P button, which is the first time that Minolta introduced their magic P button, which we'll come to later. And we've got a couple of adjustment buttons here. And then on the back, we've got a spot metering button, which falls nicely under your thumb. There's nothing else on the back at all. Underneath, tripod socket, battery case. It takes the 2CR5 battery rather than AA's, which the 1000 series did. On this side, we've got a locking back open. And on this side, we have the introduction of custom function cards in a little door with some other buttons here. The lens is still the alpha mount, which of course Sony still have, with 5 pins. We've still got 5 pins here. So it's an autofocus mount, and inside the normal things, a mirror, a screen that you can change, a focusing screen that you can change. So I changed mine for a grid, which is very useful. I was taking a lot of pictures of buildings at the time, architectural pictures. My lens is clouded slightly because it's just come in from the cold. On the front, on this side here, we've got an autofocus and manual switch, so you can switch between autofocus and manual quite easily with that switch. There we are. We've got the lens release, and we've got a button here which, if you press that in and then push the slider in manual mode, that will set your aperture while that does the shutter speed. And then on this side here, nothing at all. There's a little pip where you might expect an aperture preview, a depth of field preview button, which I think exists on the 8000i, but there isn't one on this camera. And then underneath the card slot door, there's a port with the cover missing on this camera for the remote, and the remote of course is the same remote they introduced in 1985 and is still on an Alpha 99, Sony Alpha 99 or Alpha 77 II, so still current, although just being phased out with the latest Sony cameras. So it's a fairly small number of buttons, it's not too bad at all. Let's have a look at it. So, on the little display screen at the top here, we can see at the moment we're in aperture priority mode. If I press the function button, oh, not the function button, the mode button, and then slide, I can go to manual mode, shutter priority. If I press again, back to aperture priority. So in aperture priority mode at the moment, we're on aperture of f22, and if I shift the slider, yeah, there we go, 13, 11, 9.5, 8, and so on. And if I half press the shutter, it wakes up the focus. It's beeping a lot because it's telling me that it's too dark, and I'm going to get shutter shake because I'm at a third of a second at f6.7. That's okay. I'm going to turn the beep off because it's a bit annoying. There we are. If I stick it on mode, shutter priority, then I change the shutter speed and it depicts an aperture, or it doesn't because it's too dark. So let's go all the way down to, say, f8. Yeah, there we are, f4.5. That's an eighth of a second. There we are. Ooh, it's struggling to focus there. And if I press again, manual mode, I can then change the shutter speed, and if I press the button on the side, I can change the aperture as well. And of course I can pick whatever I like, and it has little indicators in here to show whether or not I'm under or overexposed. I'm underexposed primarily. There we go. Let's do the shutter a bit and see if I can get it to expose properly. Anyway, there we are. Got a film counter, of course. If I press the magic P button, P for program, or P for panic as it's sometimes known, we can go straight into program mode, and it resets everything to automatic. So if you've changed exposure compensation or anything like that, it resets everything to automatic. And this was I think quite a good Minolta invention, in that if you are set up to take some sort of exotic landscape photograph and then a great crested grebe pops up and you quite quickly want to take a snap of it, just hit your P button and off you go. There we are. It's a great invention, and I've seen recently reviews of the Fuji X-T1 on the luminous landscape photographers complaining about the fact that through its wonderful manual controls you can reach a situation where you cannot quickly get to a sort of neutral position to take photographs. The P button allows that. It was derided greatly, but I think it's a really clever idea. So it's program, but it's program shift as well. So if I half press to wake it up and focus, I can then change the aperture and the shutter speed to suit what I think. So I quite like the P mode. Don't use it very much, nearly always use A mode myself or manual, but P mode is there and it is quite useful. The function button works with these smaller icons down the bottom here. So if I press function, okay, so we need to use function button in combination with this little arrow here, and we can see we've got three icons. We've got a plus and minus, which is exposure compensation. We've got an S, which is the drive modes, and then we've got two white brackets here, which is the focus modes. And you can see at the moment that hopefully that's highlighted with a little arrow underneath it. If I press the arrow underneath there, that will change to plus and minus. It also works at the light. There it's changed to the drive mode. Let's go again to focus. So focus mode is now highlighted. If I press function, shift left and right, it changes from wide bracketed focus mode to single spot central focus mode. Now that takes us on to the first kind of really great advantage of the 7000i over the earlier 1000 series. Whereas the 1000 series, the 7000, the 5000 and the 9000 just had a single central focusing point, the I series had a much wider area, and this made it work much better indeed. It became, for the first time, quite a decent, useful autofocus camera, rather than something that was, I'm certainly not going to say it was a gimmick, because it worked okay, but to modernise a single autofocus point in the centre seems like something distinctly antediluvian. So here we can pick a single central point if you wish, or, as most people did, the wide area autofocus. Next up, let's go to plus and minus exposure bracketing. So if I press, there we are, it's saying an eighth of a second at f4 at the moment. If I press that, I can add up to 3.5, 4 stops, plus or over or under 4 stops of compensation, which is pretty wide, really. Nobody ever really needs plus or minus 4 stops, but there we go. They're there if you want them. And if I press it once more, we go to the drive mode. So at the moment I'm on single shot. If I press function and go to the side, we've got continuous, and it works about, I can't remember, it's 2 or 3 frames a second, something like that. It's not exactly fast, but not too bad. So continuous drive or single drive. Well, single as per usual, and you'll see card here as well. In fact, yes, let's do card. Right. Underneath the card door here, let's open that up. We've got, it doesn't lock at all, we've got some more controls. We've got an ISO button, and if you press that down and then shift the, oh, apparently I can't change that. Is that because of DX code? Do I have to press function as well? No. Apparently I can't override the ISO. Yes, I can. There we go. It's just not working. There we go. So you press it once, hold it down, there we are, and then half press the shuts to get back to there again. Got a self timer, which is a 10-second self timer. There's no 2 second on this. It's just 10 seconds or nothing. We've got film rewind, which I don't know whether you can see that, but it's hidden just underneath a couple of little plastic brackets here, so you can't press it easily. And then we've got card adjust. So cards, I can pop out cards here. Now, cards, copyright 1988 Minolta camera. This is a data card. And I have here in this Minolta card case 2, attached to my strap, which is rather nice, a selection of cards. How many have I got? Not that many. Half a dozen or so. I've got data, custom, portrait, depth, close-up, multi-spot. Now, cards added functionality to the camera. And of course what we have to remember is that back in these days, in the late 80s and early 90s, you didn't get everything on a camera. They didn't come with all the functions that even quite low-end cameras do nowadays, and things that you would expect did not come as standard. Whether they should have done or not is another question. They just tended not to, certainly in a sort of consumer range camera like this, or prosumer maybe at 7,000. The cards added some functionality. Some of it was pretty daft. So for instance, portrait, and they did sports card and those sorts of things as well. If you add that in, all it does in program mode is try and pick as wide a aperture as possible to give you a shallow depth of field, ideal for portraits. Close-up gives you greater depth of field. Depth is a little bit more clever. I think that allows you to pick a close point and a far point to focus on, and it will try and pick a suitable depth of field to, or as near a depth of field as it can, to bring both of those things in focus. But these ones are rather more useful. Custom function, if we put that in and then we go through the settings, I'm not going to do it now, it lets you set loads of custom functions on the camera. I can't remember what most of them are, but things like, do you want the film leader left in or left out? Do you want it to automatically rewind at the end of the roll? All those sorts of things, you could change them by custom function. Nowadays all that stuff's just in the menu on your camera, but back then that's quite a clever thing. Data, this one's quite clever and is the one that I tend to leave in, which records the f-stop, shutter speed, film speed, and remember whether it's program, I think whether it's program or aperture mode or shutter priority or whatever, for every shot that you take. And again, for sort of technical photography, for the sort of archaeological photography and so forth that I did a lot of with this camera, that's quite useful information to know. And rather than writing it down, you could call it up later and see exactly what parameters you set for any given photo, which is quite useful indeed. Best of all of the ones that I've got is multi-spot, which is brilliant. I mentioned it's got a spot meter on there, which, well, we haven't really talked about metering, but the camera has, for the first time, matrix evaluative metering. It's not the honeycomb metering that we get in the next series of cameras, but rather than only centre weighted metering in the 1000 series, the I series had evaluative matrix metering. It's your modern metering, and it's pretty darn good. It is pretty good. You don't get centre weighted metering on this, but you do get spot metering, which of course is really useful as well. And if you, the sorts of things that I used to photograph as an archaeologist, dark trenches in sandy gravel quarries and stuff like that, your spot meter is an absolute lifesaver, it really is. A great, great thing. And not a lot of cameras had a spot meter at that time. Some cameras, like the famous OM4 Spot, is that right? Had a much more advanced spot metering system where you could take a number of spot meterings and it would calculate an average. And the multi-spot card allows you to do that too. So if we pop this in, so I'll stick that in there like that. See, it says card and it says spot here. Spot nothing. Right, if I pointed at something, take a reading, spot 1, there we go. If I pointed again, press it, spot 2. If I pointed again, spot 3. If I pointed again, spot 4. And every time I do that, it works out, it takes a spot reading from the thing that you're pointing it at, and then it gives you an average reading based on however many you do, up to, I think, 8. Spot 5, spot 6, spot 7, spot 8. Spot 8, yeah, we go no higher. So you can take 8 individual spot readings with it. It will average those and come up with an exposure. Now that is clever, and not a lot of cameras have that sort of facility in them. Maybe your top-end Canons and Nikons, but certainly nothing in this sort of bracket at that time. So, I mean, as derided as the cards were, they did have some really quite useful functionality, where you could certainly add some useful functionality for not a lot of cash. Certainly cheaper than buying a new camera. So yes, cards, well, I'll say, greatly derided, but I think they added something certainly to the camera data. Let's see if I can make this work then with the data. So if I press card, can't remember how it works, so long since I've used this one, but it should, yes, somehow if you press the card, or maybe it's in card adjust, there we go, card adjust is going to tell me the settings that I've taken for X number of photographs in the past, which saves me writing them down. Yeah, you can see I like aperture priority. I don't like 6.7. There we go. Okay. What else came on this camera? Well, the autofocusing, as we mentioned, is much, much better than before. It's much faster. There we go. Still screw autofocus. Let's see if I can make it focus on something. It won't focus on anything at all. Let's try my bottle of beer. Yeah, well there we are. It doesn't want to focus on anything at all today. I'm not really looking where I'm focusing there, which probably doesn't help. Okay, but it's reasonably fast, as you can see with the turning speed here. It's not bad at all, and it's pretty accurate. That's quite good. For the first time, we've got the new ISO hot shoe. Move all these cards out of the way for a moment. So rather than the traditional hot shoe that everybody had from the year dot, Minolta decided to invent their own hot shoe. Well, that one's been debated lots of times. Is this a better thing or is it not? It worked okay, which is fine. It's slightly fragile, and you'll see with my 7XI that the flanges on this are slightly broken. With this 5400XI, which has got the ISO hot shoe, is that the male? I suppose that's the male version. That just clicks in there and locks really quite nicely. No messing about, and the locking's really good, and it works pretty well. And that existed, of course, from 1988 right up until, well, the very latest Sony camera. So the A77 had this hot shoe, the A77 II doesn't, and we'll never see it again. So it's a bit of an evolutionary dead end. With this series of cameras, there's still no built-in flash. That's, I think some of the ones further down the range may have had a built-in flash, but certainly not on the 7000 or the 8000i. One of those nice Minolta touches, they put a little hot shoe cover on here, probably known they're slightly flat fragile. But as came with your strap, there's a little hot shoe cover holder, which is great, and you think, well, that's remarkably overbuilt for what it is, but the hot shoe holder also acts as an eyepiece cover, and it's fairly unlikely that you'll ever want the eyepiece cover and the hot shoe at the same time, so that works really rather nicely. It's just yes, a nice detail. It's the sort of thing that makes me happy. We've got a nice big bright viewfinder. In the viewfinder you've got all your normal things: shutter speed, aperture, whether or not you're under or overexposed. I think that's pretty much it. We've got AF assist light, I haven't mentioned that, which also does the self-timer. But I'm not going to take a load of pictures because I've got a black and white film in here at the moment. But 7000i and the whole I series were really functional, really good, really well built. This one's, well, it's 2015 now, so this is getting rapidly on for 30 years. Wow, that's amazing. This is getting rapidly on for 30 years old, and I've had it for almost 20 years now. I've taken thousands of photographs with it. It's getting a bit grotty around here, and the lens is getting a bit sticky as well, but that's Sigma's fault, not Minolta's, of course. It's still a really good functional camera, and I think with this one, with this series, Minolta really got it right. They're absolutely cracking cameras. We'll see with the XI series next that they went slightly off the rails. They took a lot of the lessons that they'd learned from this and thought we'll improve on it, and I don't necessarily think that they did. There are some great things about the XI series, but certainly when you look at the I series compared to the 1000 series, it looks a lot more modern. A lot of these sorts of things, well, obviously that's not quite the same as the rolling dials, but we're getting the right idea here. But the P mode, button presses for all this stuff, auto everything. Of course, the 9000i's got a winder rather than. Oh, it's going to go 30 seconds now. I've got a lens cap on. That was foolish. But you know, this looks like cameras of the late 80s and early 90s. This one, the 9000, still looks like a bit of a hybrid. The 7000 looks a bit more modern, I think. But you know, this really starts to look like a modern camera and holds itself really well. As I say, I really like this camera. I think it's great. I'll be happy to use it today. It's made me an awful lot of really nice pictures. Okay, there we are.